I went from the smallest iPhone that you can buy, the iPhone 13 mini, to the massive Samsung Galaxy Fold 5, and the shift has been crazy. You know I love Apple, I was very tied to their ecosystem, but there's no denying that throughout the years, iPhone hasn't made many changes. Sure, we've seen the notch get smaller and eventually turn into the dynamic island. We've seen cameras get bigger and better, but there's no denying that iPhone is getting stale. And then you move to the Samsung Fold 5, where they've been innovating for years, a polished and premium feel that when you unfold to a massive 7.6-inch display, it just feels like foldables are the future. Comparing the two phones is incredibly hard, and if we call the iPhone 13 mini the minimal digital detox phone, then the Fold 5 is my powerhouse multitasker. And before you comment anything, no, this is not an iPhone versus Android video. We know there's been no shortage of those out there. Instead, it's about trying out a phone that feels exciting and refreshing, basically all the things that iPhone isn't. So the first thing I noticed with the Fold 5 is that Samsung is king when it comes to build quality. No other foldable on the market gave me the security that Samsung did, where it just feels high-end. This year they've closed that gap in the hinge to be totally flat to stop dirt from getting in and then damaging the inside display. And they've been refining this lineup for 5 years, where now I no longer look at this phone as experimental. It really just feels ready for your average consumer. Shout out to Mr. Keyboard, who tested the Fold 5 where it was opened over 400,000 times before causing damage. That's the equivalent to 100 times per day for 10 years. I've unlocked the phone more than usual, between 100 to 150 times per day, but that's truly because this phone is a joy to use, where I actually want to use it often. You've got a gorgeous display on the front that's not just a cover screen, it's a fully capable phone that you could theoretically use for any and all tasks, or you can open to an expansive 7.6-inch display. The crease in the middle of the screen is apparent, and I can't really avoid talking about it in this video. If you rub your finger over it, you do feel that noticeable crease. In daylight or lighting from the side, you will definitely see it, and there's no one that can really promise you otherwise. But one thing I didn't expect is that if you look at the screen head on, the crease literally disappears, and because you're scrolling vertically, you never really need to feel it. I had the Flip 4 and found it incredibly visible and almost unusable, and I don't know how much the crease has actually changed since last year's phones, or how different the Flip to the Fold are, but I was really pleasantly surprised that I could forget it was there altogether on this phone. This is the first phone I've had in a long time that forced me to rethink my workflow. Every app, every interaction, I quickly began to question, is this a front screen or a large screen action? And I'll go into more detail on that decision in my long-term review, but what I found was most quick tasks like glancing at notifications, checking messages, simple one-handed use, or non-tablet optimized apps like Twitter were for the front screen. Then anything that was a longer action would unfold to the bigger screen. And a huge thank you to Samsung for understanding how people actually want to use foldables and offering custom home screens, wallpapers, app drawer layouts on the cover versus that larger display. So basically I have at-a-glance widgets on the front screen and then a few quick apps that I use often. Then on the unfolded display, I have a completely different set of apps, including those that I've pinned together so they always stay open side by side. Everyone talks about how Apple does this whole hardware and software working together for this magical experience, but I would say Samsung actually nailed it in this category. The inside display has a dock on the home screen, and then when you open an app, it turns into a dock with quick access to apps that you can drag in for multitasking. It's super intuitive that when you fold the screen, in Samsung's apps, they magically reordered the screen, or when you're taking a photo, you can tap to turn on the outer display so that everyone can see a massive viewfinder. It's very apparent that no one could make this phone except Samsung. Where most people get caught up in the ecosystem and the jump from iOS to Android, I was just really excited for a truly different phone experience. One of my favorite things about iPhone were the cameras. I never found another phone that captured photos in the details that I could get on an iPhone. I can't pretend that the Fold 5 outperformed the iPhone 14 Pro Max or really even the iPhone 13 mini. On the back, you're getting 3 lenses, a 10 megapixel telephoto, 50 megapixel wide angle, and a 12 megapixel ultra wide. The photos I took tended to produce oversaturated colors that often look like they had an old Instagram filter on them, and in low light it tended to blur out some of the details, but still it managed to produce some great results in good lighting, and if you're not coming from a Pro Series iPhone, you're not even going to notice a lot of these drawbacks anyway. The phone also has 2 more cameras, a 10 megapixel cover display camera and a 4 megapixel under display, which honestly Isn't that great? But with 5 cameras, you have options of how to take photos in selfie mode, point and shoot, or even turning on the cover display as a viewfinder to take advantage of better cameras on the rear. Options you just don't get on an iPhone. And when it comes to battery life, this is something that I was scared about. And in the first few weeks, you get a good glimpse into what it'll be like. On the Flip 4, it was terrible and I had to charge halfway through my day. My iPhone 13 mini seemed to last right to the end of the day with less than 10% battery left. So I just needed something that could last comparable to that. The Fold 5 massively impressed me, lasting 1.5 days of battery life. In this graph, I was using Android Auto for quick trips, but with those 5-minute charges, it nearly lasted 2 full days. At night, the battery drain was typically 10% overnight, and through my testing, I never needed to actually plug this phone in at night, simply plugging it in halfway through that second day for the quick charge. Now keep in mind, I'm not a gamer, so you might have a very different experience from me, but as somebody who browses the web, social, watches a fair share of YouTube, I was really impressed with this phone, and I think that Samsung made some major improvements to efficiency with this phone versus last year's gen, from what I've heard from other people at least. So overall, this phone has been incredibly impressive. On its 5th year of this lineup, this is the best version of the Fold series, and one that I'm confident is actually durable enough for anybody to buy. It's the first phone that made me question my workflow and think, are there better ways of doing this? And there's still so much more I'm testing on this phone, like the long-term battery life, using Google's apps versus Samsung's apps, the best optimized apps for that inner display, Samsung One UI, which is getting so much better, the size and the usability of that cover screen, so stay tuned for a long-term review if you want answers to all of that. But what I can say now is that every fear that I had from switching from iPhone to Android, using a Samsung phone in general, or even using a foldable have all been met with exceeded expectations and actually an enjoyable experience. This is the most fun that I've had with a phone since the iPhone first launched. And I'm not taking a stance of iPhone versus Android, but what I am saying is that if you feel that phones are getting boring or stale, or you often have tasks that require waiting until you're near a computer, or tasks where you flip back and forth between apps, then this is a phone that will change your life.